Whoosh! Whoosh! Come on, have you never had that dream where you thought you could fly? I started having that when I was about 7 years old. Every night, going to fantastic places. And then 10 years later, I became a pilot. And 40 years on, and I'm still a pilot, and I've been doing it every day all that time, living the dream. But I must be honest, I never once used my arms. Instead, I used helicopters. And I used them to rescue people, and I used them to film from. Now, for those of you who have been living in a cave for some time, here is what a helicopter looks like. That's me practicing for rescue work by balancing one wheel on a cliff. And you can do wonderful things with helicopters, provided that they have this, which is called a tail rotor. And the tail rotor is at the back of the helicopter, and it rotates very fast in order to stop the whole of the rest of the machine spinning around and around. Except that one day, mine failed. And this leads from a very good day at the office to a very bad day at the office, because you can't practice for it, because it's too catastrophic. And actually, it generally kills you. So, I had been filming that day in Scotland. This is the last picture taken of the aircraft that I had the accident in. And I was on my way back home, down to the south of England, when suddenly, at 5,000 feet, there was the most awful bang, and I found myself hanging from my seatbelt. Let me just demonstrate that to you. Normally, when I'm flying along, I'm sitting quite happily. I've got 2 feet on the pedals, which controls which way we're pointing. I've got my left arm down here, and that's for the height control. And I've got my right arm here, and that's for which way we're tilting. And whichever way we're tilting is the way we're going. Except that, suddenly, I found myself facing this way, still going that way, way over on the side, and really not in control of what was going on. At that moment, my brain speeded up to a level that it has never been at before or since. My Superman moment. Now, they used to say of Ayrton Senna, the essential racing driver, that he could go through a corner and he could see every inch of that corner and know exactly what his car had been doing at every inch of that corner and come back and relate it. And so it was for me in my little cockpit. But it only lasted 2 seconds. In the first second, I was feeling this machine. I was feeling her through my bottom, through the balance in my ears, through my hands, both the left and the right. The feet weren't working anymore, but I could also hear what was going on. And all of that analysis was not terribly surprising, because I had been flying helicopters for many years by then. But when we moved into the... Oh, sorry, I just need to tell you this. Why were we not spinning and crashing at that point? Well, that's because this tail rotor up here goes alongside a big shark's fin, and we were doing 150 knots, and that meant that the aircraft was trying to at least keep herself pointing roughly in the direction we were going. So as we moved into the second, I started to receive unbelievable inputs. I know not from where, but apparently they were buried deep in my brain. I got pictures, I got diagrams, I got whole manuals, I got lesson plans, 40-minute lesson plans, one after another, and I even got a whole conversation that I had had with a military pilot about 10 years earlier who had suffered the same failure, but in a different type of helicopter. And with each one, I very carefully, methodically unwrapped it. I took each item that came to me, each item of conversation, each diagram, each picture, and I said, do I need that or not? If I don't need it, let's discard it. If I do need it, let's put it over here. and then let's prioritize it into a checklist of actions. As we moved into the third second, I was back in the cockpit again, and I pulled the transmit button and called pan, pan, pan. That's very like a mayday, but it means I appear to still be flying, but I'm going to need an awful lot of help very, very soon. It's very good for getting the attention of air traffic controllers, actually. I was joined quite soon thereafter by an oil rig support helicopter, just like this one. And there wasn't much he could do, but he did come and sit out on my starboard side here, and it was encouraging that he was there, and he was able to tell me that, sure enough, my tail rotor down the back was not turning anymore, but also, thankfully, that it hadn't damaged that big shark's fin, so that wasn't going to fall off as I tried to meet with Mother Earth again. So, we're over on our side. I've got a cameraman in this seat, and I've got a film producer down the back. And I instructed them to start strapping things down, because things were probably going to start flying around quite soon. And meanwhile, I experimented with this new type of flying machine that I had no experience of. I found that as long as I kept her above 60, she was okay, but get any slower than that, and she really wanted to spin like a toy. So I stayed up at 70. The thing that, oh, sorry, I need to just tell you, yes, of course. Yeah, we did make it to the ground. But as I found myself back in the seat and looking, remember, sideways still along towards the runway, I was going through a checklist in my head of what it was that I was supposed to be doing. And this checklist had been given to me by my Superman moment. And there was something that kept bothering me. And that was this little message in my head saying, I ran out of hands. Okay, check. Do this, do this. I ran out of hands. Kept niggling away at me. Okay, do this, do this. And I got to the point in the checklist where I needed to brief the guys with me on what to expect in the minutes that were coming up. The type of things that would overwhelm us all, what I would be doing, and what I needed them to do. I suddenly realized I will run out of hands. Let me just explain that to you. Here I am. Here would be the runway. I would be flying sideways like this. Here is my height control. I'd be 5 feet above the ground, 60 knots, and I need to shut down both engines in order to get the helicopter to come around and point down the runway. Otherwise, we would just roll down the runway. The throttle controls, the engine controls, are up here in the ceiling. I immediately briefed the cameraman on my left on the internal workings of a helicopter engine. It was probably the quickest lesson anybody ever had in their life on that subject. And I can promise you, he was very, very attentive. Anyway, the thing that people ask me most often about this incident and about the rescue flying that I've done is, were you not afraid? And the honest answer to that is no, because there's too much to do in this office of mine. You're too busy to be afraid. But that isn't quite true in these circumstances, because going down my checklist, going through my Superman moment, I had been shown the last few accident reports from that type of helicopter and that type of accident. And in all cases, the whole crew had perished. So we lined up. I say lined up, I'm still facing this way, the runway is that way. And I was still concentrating, but at the moment that my shepherd out here peeled away and just said, good luck, that was when I really had to harness that fear, use it towards a successful conclusion, because failure was not an option at that point. We arrived at that moment, doing 60 knots, over the threshold of the runway, 5 feet, carefully judged, and I called out, "Now!" to the cameraman on my left. And he, with the qualification he had gained about 30 seconds earlier, reached up to both throttles, pulled them back, and shut off the fuel. And as he did that, as I had planned, the helicopter came rapidly round to the left. So fast, I can hardly describe it to you. And as she came through the runway heading, I put her firmly on the ground. What she really wanted to do was cartwheel down that runway. So we had a little discussion. She went up on one wheel. I fought the controls over this way, and we stayed like that for a good 100 yards down the runway, teetering. And then she decided, thankfully, to give me a few more years. And she came back down onto the other wheel, and we, all three of us, gulped in a lot of oxygen whilst I applied the brakes and got to the end of the runway. As we stopped, the cameraman, who was now level with me again, looked across at me and he said, "Jerry, I have no idea how you instantaneously and instinctively knew exactly what to do and in exactly what order." And I looked back at him and I said, "No, mate, nor have I." Now, let me make the wild assumption for a minute that most of you here are unlikely to have to deal with a tail rotor failure in a helicopter. Let's talk instead about survival. And I don't mean my survival or your survival individually. I mean collectively, all of our survival. Because we're part of a big species that's supposed to be the most intelligent species on the planet. Except that we're part of a species that not only condones, but actively encourages ignorance in some subjects, like evolution in America, or climate change in Australia. What is that about? We talked earlier about a racing driver. Well, apparently it applies to cricketers and other sportsmen, where their mind accelerates and they're able to judge things. A cricketer apparently can see the stitching on the ball coming towards him, so he can judge the rotation of the ball, judge the speed, and know exactly where it's going to go when he hits it. Or some of them can, anyway. They did a really interesting experiment a few years back, very simple, where they took the likes of you and I and put us into a video simulator of crossing the road. So we were surrounded by screens, and they threw various life-threatening incidents at us, and we had to avoid them. They then put some professional sportsmen through the same thing. Do you know those sportsmen were twice as likely to survive those incidents? Not because they could move much quicker than you and I, but because their brains, they had taught to work at a higher speed, and therefore they could assimilate what was going on around them and decide what reaction they were going to take to that. Also, they were somewhat more aware than you and I often are. I've asked myself ever since that incident of mine, if it's possible for me to speed up my brain to that level, then I need it then. Why can I not artificially make my brain work just a little bit faster? I mean, if it could work at that sort of rate, just imagine, I could do all of my work by 9:08 and then go surfing for the rest of the day. But I then started to reflect on how we're giving away our brain functions to machines. First the pocket calculator, then the PC, and then the smartphone, and an app, and so on, and so on, and so on. You know, there's a drone. The probability is that one of those, somewhere in the world today, killed somebody. It didn't stop and think about it. It just did what it was told. I think that it's time that we took back control of some of those brain functions. You know, there are people in the world who do such extraordinary things with their brains that they are changing the very fabric of the world in which we live. Here's one, Mr. Stephen Hawking. Does he do that in spite of his disabilities, or does he perhaps do them because of his disabilities? I don't know. Perhaps fear accelerates our brain to be able to protect us. Perhaps that's why people who have had near-death experiences, and by the way, there are 4 people here today who have related exactly that to me, have seen their whole life flash before them. For just 2 seconds of my life, I have been Superman. And it saved my life. That's an unbelievably powerful mechanism. I clearly have it. I think you guys have it. I think we all have it. And I think that we have to perhaps think about whether we could harness that and use our brains more effectively. We have to want to do that, and we have to decide, if I could move my brain a bit quicker, what would I do with it? Well, the choice that I have made is, apart from the flying, to then write down some of my experiences, because there is a culture in aviation, much like the ancient peoples, I suppose, of telling stories, of admitting to your mistakes, of sharing any experience from which you think somebody else can learn. So I've done that with books. I've done that with the film work that I've done. For example, shared the experience of flying over the oil fires of Kuwait when they were burning. That's a story of insanity. Sharing a story of flying over New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina had hit. And that is a story of ignorance and man's arrogance, really. Sharing the story of our very own Victoria in the aftermath of those worst bushfires in 2009. And that is a story of ignoring fact. So I want you to do something for me. I want you to go home tonight and work out if you can make your brain work just a little bit harder. And then decide what you're going to do with it. I think that you can give wings to your brain and really make it fly, because I've had it happen to me. We all have endless possibilities within us. What are you going to do with yours? Thank you.